All right, good day, folks. Everything new under the sun. I want to talk about the assassination of the commander of the chemical and biological defense forces of Russia. This is a look at an explosion that took place. Mute that because we don't need the sound there. But this is a turning point. This is a red line. And what happened was there was a scooter that was standing up beside these two men as they came out by that telephone pole there, and it exploded. So it's an IED, an improvised explosive device. And this is a video from a car that was right across the road. Now there's a whole bunch of video of this, which suggests again that maybe there was outside. Well, it's Ukraine obviously taking out, assassinating some of Russia's generals if they can, whomever they can. But the suggestion is also that, in fact, that the CIA helped do this. Now, a lot of Russians have cameras in their cars that are recording all the time because the crime, because the corruption of the police. They have cams, dash cams in their cars, basically at all times, again, because of the corruption. And that's the only way they can prove to a judge if they have video evidence of it. So it's not unlikely for cars to have dash cam footage like that. But interesting nonetheless. Now, this is a red line. Now, as I talk about this, I'm going to get into 3 biblical passages that speak of nuclear war. And this escalation basically is heading or is pushing us to nuclear war very, very quickly. And the Bible, in several places, not just one, several places seem to describe, in terms of a vision, basically the effects of a thermonuclear war, a nuclear weapon being used, and even using words like wormwood, which in Russian is Chernobyl. So Russia says Ukraine allies are accomplices, Ukraine allies in Moscow assassination. Now, again, this is a red line for Russia. Putin says it himself, which we're going to read. But this also means that Russia can now start assassinating Ukrainian generals, Ukrainian leaders. And they even say this further on. But the extension of this is that Russia can probably go with impunity and start taking out other Western leaders if Ukraine keeps this up, basically. It says it also brings up questions of past reports exposing CIA program to train and assist Ukraine's special forces and intelligence in sabotage and cross-border targeting. Last year, the Washington Post had a big report about how Ukraine's intelligence services were capable of carrying out assassinations inside Russia, thanks to the support they received from the CIA since 2014. President Putin had just this week warned that the West is going beyond Russia's red line. So they're beyond it. So the button could be pushed at any time now. We are beyond all of Russia's red lines. We've been crossing them left, right, and center over the last 12 months, 2 years. So beyond Russia's red lines in support of Ukraine, and said things are escalating at a dangerous pace. As for the latest scooter bomb assassination, the Kremlin is likely to immediately suspect the CIA and Western intelligence services may have assisted. The bomb, which was detonated remotely, had a large blast radius and was clearly a very sophisticated device, given the smallness of what was a literal children's scooter apparently used in the plot. Clearly, the hit was carefully planned and choreographed, as the attack seemed to have been filmed with ground view from a nearby vehicle, and that's what we watched in this Twitter video, this X video. But again, a lot of Russian cars have dash cams. If you go on YouTube and search for Russian dash cam, you'll find a lot of them. Again, just because of the corruption, they'll get totally taken to jail and used and abused if they don't have video evidence from the judges there. Moscow is vowing that Ukraine will pay dearly, with Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman and former President Medvedev warning in a fresh statement in the aftermath of Kirillov's death, attempts to intimidate our nation, stop Russian offensive, or sow fear are doomed. Certain punishment awaits the Banderite Nazis, including top military and political leaders of a crumbling country. So top military and political leaders. Now, Russia has the intelligence and the capability to do this. And again, this guy was the head of the Radiological, Chemical, and Biological Defense. He was a chief, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov. And so there's a whole thing about him in Russian there. So this is obviously a big deal. Now this is RT Russia Today, and you know, it's a mouthpiece for the Russian government. You know, there's probably propaganda in here, but notice here that it speaks to Ukraine and U.S.-led biolabs. There's a lot of biolabs in there, which was something that was reported on during the whole pandemic period, with questions about, you know, what were they doing there. There's a network of U.S.-backed microbiological labs, so chemical weapons labs and biology weapon labs, bioweapon labs in Ukraine. And it's part of the massive corruption in Ukraine. And there's corruption everywhere. But I think it's common knowledge that Ukraine is one of the more corrupt countries in Europe there, and you know, totally controlled by U.S. foreign policies, intelligence agencies, etc. That's the whole Hunter Biden situation, right? There's a lot of stuff going in there. Kirillov claimed that the U.S. evacuated some 16,000 relevant samples from Ukraine, while other pieces of evidence were destroyed, but some materials were captured by Russian military, giving Moscow a glimpse into the clandestine research. And Ukraine was a place they could go and do research in secrecy, away from the American public, with plausible deniability, and also to say, you know, it's not on U.S. soil, so it's not our fault, and they can use black money for it and use shell companies, et cetera, to conduct all this research. Just like Fauci was involved with the lab in China, right? There's a pile of money and funding, gain-of-function research, all related to Fauci's and the U.S. tax dollars going to fund this gain-of-function research, which and what came out of that? Well, the pandemic, right? So all this to point out that there are two major powers, Russia and United States. United States is on the verge of economic collapse, as are all Western nations, and we're poking the bear in the eye. We're poking Russia, and Russia has already come out and said, "You've crossed all the red lines." And we went beyond Russia's red line, and that was direct from Putin himself. So at any time, he believes he has the ability and the right to push the button on the nuclear warheads and take us out. And again, you could argue that is the case. And the point of it is that it brings us close to nuclear war. And the Bible does describe a time of nuclear war. All right, so let's turn the page. Let's go over and look at the Bible and see what it says about nuclear war. This is from opentheword.org. And it speaks of three Bible passages that warn of nuclear war. Does the Bible warn of nuclear war in the end times? Let's go down here. And many of the Old Testament and New Testament prophets were seers, meaning that they were seeing visions of events that would take place, in some instances, thousands of years into the future. So, of course, a lot of Bible prophecy is about yet future events. Isaiah 17, destruction of Damascus, Gog in the land of Magog, and that Gog and Magog battle, and Zechariah, which describes a nuclear war, and of course Psalm 83, the inner circle and outer circle of nations. There's just a lot of prophecy, and Revelation is all about the wrath of God and the Lord's return, and the stuff that's going to happen there. And Matthew, Luke, etc., all speak to future events, things that have not happened yet. So the question is, how would a prophet describe nuclear war? And I've spoken about this in other videos in different ways, but let's have a look at it again. So when the most advanced weapons of their day was bows and swords, how would they describe what they see in a vision of a nuclear war? Well, they're going to try and use props and the idea of bows and swords and weapons that they had in their terminology, right? How would a prophet describe the effects of a nuclear blast? The first passage describing nuclear devastation is put forward by Breaking Israel News. They wrote part of this. And they looked at similarities with an end times battle between Israel and the nations referred to as the Battle of Gog and Magog. So this is Ezekiel 38. Um, and it speaks here, at the evening time, behold, there is terror. Before morning, there are no more. Such will be the portion of those who plunder us, and the lot who pillage us. And so this passage is from Isaiah, but again, speaking of a sudden terror, and related to the Gog-Magog situation in Ezekiel 38. Some translations describe it as a sudden terror, and by morning the armies are no more. Secondly, the prophet describes people fleeing to fortified cities and hiding in terror in caves. It says this is a bit unusual, since attacks on cities during the time these prophecies were given usually took months to evacuate in a city, and it would be word of mouth and maybe a horn of some sort, and sometimes years to evacuate. Now they're evacuating quickly, in the span of hours or days. But it says, sometimes years before invading armies broke through the walls and starved out the residents. It was not unusual for invading armies just to give up and go home, so people tended to flee the walled cities for refuge. But in this instance, Isaiah saw something completely different happening. The sudden devastation will cause people to actually flee the cities and head underground. So something immediately is going to happen. Now, in this day and age, if war is declared or incoming missiles are happening in Israel, what happens? People immediately flee to the underground bunkers. They're notified immediately within seconds through their cell phones, right? Isaiah 2, verse 19 says, men will go into caves of the rocks and into holes of the ground before the terror of the Lord. Now, there's a lot of reference in Revelation related to the wrath of God that's coming, where people will flee to into the mountains. But it also describes what our current technology is for nuclear war right now, which is bunkers. It says, so what is Isaiah seeing? Now notice he says that people will not only be hiding in caves, but also in holes underneath the ground. During World War II, governments around the world built massive underground bunkers to protect government leaders from nuclear attack. And many of them are still in use today. So holes that we created, not just caves, but actual holes. Holes assumes something dug that hole. Isaiah 13, chapter 13 says, for the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Now, this describes a nuclear winter, right? So it says, today we refer to this as a nuclear winter when smoke and sulfur from devastation caused by multiple nuclear strikes would block the sun's rays from hitting the earth, resulting in worldwide cooling. It's curious that Isaiah saw this happening in conjunction with the great Gog and Magog battle, Ezekiel 38. Now, there's a second possible mention of a nuclear attack found in the book of Zechariah, and I've done a video in Zechariah as well, by the way. It says that in some ways resembles a fallout from a nuclear battle. It is probable Zechariah was also describing the Gog-Magog attack on Israel. So again, connecting these prophecies together, things which have not happened yet future. And again, I have done a video on this. Now this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Gog, Magog, they attack Israel, the nation of Israel, and Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongue will rot in their mouths. This is the description of a thermonuclear device. And it doesn't destroy buildings as much. I believe I'm describing the correct type of nuclear weapon. But it destroys any flesh, animals, people, and destroys them so fast that your eyes are dissolved in your socket, and your tongue in your mouth before your bones even fall to the ground. While they stand on their feet, this is a massive weapon, and that's known. That's known to be results of a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon can do that sort of damage, which is interesting. Zechariah says in the verse that people's flesh, eyes, and tongues will rot, literally fall off while the people are still standing. It will happen so quickly that the people will not even have a chance to fall to the ground. The prophet Zechariah adds that as a result of this battle, 2/3 of Israel's population will be killed, Zechariah 13. And it is interesting to note that the result of the devastation, the 1/3 who survived will turn to God. And that's really when God takes over and says, okay, now I'm going to save the remnant. It says, and this may be what the Apostle Paul was referring to in Romans 11:26 when he asks of the Jews, when he talks of Jews returning to Christ. The third description of a possible nuclear battle mentioned in the Bible is in the book of Revelation. It says there's one passage that could be a reference to an asteroid, but John does something very unusual. He gives it is the ominous name wormwood. He gives it the ominous name wormwood. The third angel sounded. A great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and of the springs of the waters. The name of the star is called wormwood. Now, what is wormwood in Russian? It's Chernobyl. Was there any nuclear disaster in a place called Chernobyl in Russia? Yes, actually, sorry, not Russia, Ukraine. It's in Ukraine. Chernobyl is there, and that was the greatest nuclear accident ever to happen. It said, and a third of the waters became wormwood, or you could say Chernobyl. And so we know the example of Chernobyl. And many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. It could be an asteroid, says the writer. John named it wormwood. It suggests that there was that this one was different from all the other ones he saw in his end-time visions. So when they give specific names like wormwood, there's always something, a meaning behind the word, right? So that's what you need to look at. John described wormwood as having an elongated shape, like a burning torch. This description fits an intercontinental ballistic missile re-entering the atmosphere before unleashing nuclear devastation. Are they using ballistic missiles right now? That's what their hypersonic missiles are that they're using. They're ballistic, and they're not necessarily intercontinental, but they are ballistic, interballistic, going between nation states. That's what they hit Ukraine with just recently. With I forget the name of the particular ballistic missile that they used, but it was new technology. And it was a ballistic missile, and it looked like an elongated shape, like a burning torch. John says the water will come like this flaming torch, wormwood. Is this a description of a nuclear bomb contaminating the water with nuclear radiation? The Bible describes that as well. So, the Bible describes nuclear weapons being used. I believe we are on the precipice of World War III and nuclear war, at least limited to the point where it doesn't destroy all man on Earth, but it takes everybody down a notch to where they're desperate, to where they will receive a world leader who comes into the picture and says, I will bring peace, I will restore the economy. If you give me all the power to run the nations, the United Nations, whatever it may be, give up all your national sovereignty, give up all your national currencies, I will bring in a one world currency and bring peace, and everybody will vote for him at that point, because they will be desperate for peace, they will be desperate for food, for security, for economic security after economic collapse of the World War III. And it describes a perfect opportunity for an antichrist figure to come to power. And this is the situation we exist in right now, where we're on just the edge, the nice edge of this occurring, the precipice, right, looking over the cliff into the abyss, if you will, for this to happen, and to really set the stage and to open the door for the Antichrist to come in into a world where all the citizens of the world will readily accept and vote him and accept him as a one world leader with a one world government in the name of peace and security. And doesn't the Bible say something about peace and security in the last days? And with the arrival of the Antichrist, that kicks off the 7-year period, the tribulation and the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation be the wrath of God, the tribulation being about 3.5 years, where the temple is rebuilt, the third temple in Jerusalem. And at the end of the 3.5 years, the Antichrist sits on the throne, and the third temple declares himself to be God. And that's when the wrath of God comes. And just before the wrath of God, when the abomination of desolation happens, I believe that's when the rapture of the church occurs. We will not be here for God's wrath, but we will be here for Satan's wrath, for the wrath of mankind on the Christians, as the Christians will be persecuted, some even to death in the last days. Thanks for watching. I'll leave it there. We'll see you in the next video.